The instant Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez told President Trump that he symbolized everything defective about capitalism on live television, she committed the fatal error that every socialist seems destined to repeat. She had entirely overlooked the fact that she was challenging a self-made billionaire who genuinely grasps economics, whereas she was unable to articulate the source of the $93 trillion required for the Green New Deal. Fox News had arranged the great American debate on capitalism versus socialism as the political spectacle of the year, potentially even defining the entire decade. The concept originated as an offhand remark during a Fox and Friends broadcast, wondering how incredible it would be if Trump actually debated AOC regarding the economy. The reaction from the viewing public was so intense that within 48 hours, the network had pledged to make the event a reality. They contacted both camps, offering primetime broadcasting slots, and marketed it as the dialogue that America desperately required. To the astonishment of everyone, both parties consented to the arrangement. AOC's team had persuaded her that this was her opportunity to instruct Fox News spectators on democratic socialism, to demonstrate to America that progressive economics were logical, and to verify she was more than merely a social media phenomenon. They had invested weeks in her preparation, hiring economists to assist her in comprehending the Nordic model, and rehearsing rebuttals for every predicted assault. They prepared talking points regarding wealth disparity, climate change, and corporate avarice, while coordinating with sympathetic media outlets to ensure favorable reporting. They were certain that AOC's charisma, her verbal abilities, and her intense advocacy would convert viewers who had never heard the socialist argument delivered correctly, yet they had profoundly misjudged both their candidate and their adversary. Trump's team had accepted immediately for one solitary reason, which was that Trump had been anticipating this specific moment for years. He had observed AOC disseminate economic absurdities on social media, attack capitalism while residing in opulence, and propose trillion-dollar initiatives with no financing strategy. He had watched her position herself as the representative of the working class, despite being raised in affluent suburbs, and he had seen her drive Amazon out of New York, eliminating 25,000 jobs while labeling it a triumph. He had watched her advocate for the Green New Deal without possessing the ability to elucidate fundamental cost projections, and he had seen her become the figurehead of progressive economics despite exhibiting total economic ignorance. Now he was prepared to dismantle her on live television in front of 20 million spectators. AOC had accepted because she believed she could school Fox News viewers regarding democratic socialism, having prepared her arguments about Nordic nations, wealth gaps, and corporate greed. She wore her most costly designer attire, which was ironic considering the subject matter, and she had practiced her narrative about being just a girl from the Bronx. She was prepared to go viral with video clips of her defeating Trump, but Trump had agreed because he never retreats from a conflict, and because he had been waiting for this opportunity. He brought items AOC had not expected, including a calculator, her tax returns, photographs of her lavish lifestyle, and the comprehensive cost analysis of the Green New Deal that her office had attempted to conceal. He had completed his homework, he had organized his receipts, and he was on the verge of providing America with the economics lesson that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had somehow bypassed despite her degree from Boston University. What transpired during the subsequent 90 minutes would reveal the largest deception in progressive politics, transform the phrase "tax the rich" into a joke, and diminish a social media superstar into a humiliated backbencher. If you have ever desired to witness what occurs when an individual who actually constructed an empire encounters someone who tended bar and believes that qualifies her for economics, this is that moment. Wait until Trump produces her complaint regarding her $174,000 salary at minute 38, because the look on her face communicates everything. The Fox News studio in Manhattan was filled beyond the capacity allowed by fire codes, and security personnel were forced to turn away hundreds of people attempting to enter. The audience of 500 was divided roughly evenly, with Trump supporters in MAGA hats and American flag apparel on one side, and AOC supporters in tacks, the rich shirts, and Democratic Socialist pins on the other. There was a small section of genuinely undecided voters positioned in the center who were about to witness history. The set was constructed for maximum theatricality, with two podiums facing one another at an angle, while massive screens loomed behind them to display evidence. Sean Hannity sat at a moderator's desk between them, appearing like a man who realized he was about to observe either the greatest debate or the greatest catastrophe in the history of television. Backstage, the divergence was absolute, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's green room vibrated with activity, and 8 staff members were coordinating social media tactics. A communications director was formulating ideas for viral clips. 2 economists were attempting to help her grasp actual economics, and a stylist was applying the final touches. A crisis team stood ready to deploy GOP attacks, women of color narratives if the evening went poorly, while AOC herself sat reviewing flashcards packed with data on inequality, climate change, and Nordic healthcare. She was certain her immense following and progressive street credibility would carry the day, but Trump's green room told a different story. It was simply him, his notes, and a Diet Coke, with no frantic aides, no spin doctors, and no economists explaining the fundamentals. It was just Trump being Trump, reviewing his talking points, refining his punchlines, and smirking at what he was about to do to the social media star of the left. He has constructed Manhattan skyscrapers. He spent 50 years navigating the New York real estate jungle, and he won the White House when nobody believed he could. Now he is prepared to educate a former bartender turned congresswoman on economics live on TV, just as a producer calls out 2 minutes, Mr. President. Trump stands up, adjusts his trademark red tie, and walks toward the stage with the swagger of a man who has played this game 1,000 times and never suffered a loss. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez steps out first to a thunder of applause from her supporters and a polite nod from the remainder of the room. She is wearing a cream-colored designer suit that likely costs more than what most Americans pay in monthly rent, a detail Trump is certain to exploit. She waves to the camera lens with the precision of an influencer, flashes the bright smile that has fueled 1,000 Instagram posts, and takes her position at the podium with the poise of someone who has never faced a true heavyweight. 30 seconds later, President Trump enters to an ovation so immense it literally causes the cameras to vibrate. The cheering continues for nearly a minute, compelling Sean Hannity to keep signaling the crowd for silence. Wearing his classic dark suit and red tie, Trump waves, points out a few familiar faces, and settles in with the effortless confidence of a man who has owned much larger stages and won much more difficult battles. Sean Hannity opened the evening by outlining the format, which included moderator questions, rebuttals, direct debate, and audience questions at the conclusion. He emphasized the necessity for deep discussion and mutual respect, though that respect would endure for about 90 seconds. Sean began with a core question about their economic systems, starting to ask Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez to explain her vocal advocacy for democratic socialism. AOC cut him off to pivot to her planned attack, stating that before they discussed theory, she thought it was important to address what they were actually debating. Her voice assumed that earnest and slightly breathless tone that works wonders on social media, and she turned to look Trump directly in the eye. She declared that President Trump is the poster child for everything wrong with capitalism, citing greed, exploitation, the hoarding of wealth, and a system rigged for billionaires while the working class drowns. She claimed he was born into wealth, stepped on workers to get ahead, and is now here to protect a system that has failed millions of regular Americans. The crowd began to murmur as she went on the attack from the start, insisting we need democratic socialism like they have in Nordic countries where healthcare is a right and education is free. She argued that billionaires pay their fair share and working families finally get a shot at the American dream that capitalism has stolen from them. A bartender trying to lecture a billionaire on economics was going to be interesting, and a massive grin spread across Trump's face. She had just handed him the perfect opening, so he asked if he should call her Alexandria, or if she preferred Sandy. He noted that Sandy from Westchester was the real name, speaking in his thick Queen's accent that was already cutting through the room. The audience broke into laughter as he scored a point, but he agreed to discuss capitalism versus socialism since he loved the subject. He stated it was one of his favorites because he had actually lived it, having built real things like skyscrapers you can touch and businesses that provide jobs for thousands of people. He paused to let the moment hang there, then said he had a question for her since she held an economics degree from Boston University. He remarked that it was a good and very expensive school that probably cost her parents $250,000 for those 4 years. AOC started to look a bit uneasy and began to say her education wasn't the issue. But Trump interjected cheerfully that since she had that degree, she ought to understand the basics of the economy. He asked her to explain something, pulled out a tablet to give it a tap, and footage started playing on the big screens behind them. The clip showed AOC in an interview saying with total sincerity that unemployment is low only because everyone has 2 jobs and people are working 60 or 80 hours a week. Trump let the whole video play through, then turned to her with a look of mock bewilderment, stating honestly that is not how unemployment works. He explained that unemployment simply measures the percentage of people who are out of work, and if someone has 2 jobs, they are counted as one employed person rather than 2. He shifted his attention toward the crowd, noting this woman has an economics degree from Boston University, yet doesn't even grasp how unemployment is calculated. The room exploded in laughter, while even some of AOC's own supporters looked visibly uneasy. But Trump went on to dive into her greatest economic achievement. He asked if everyone remembered Amazon, noting that Jeff Bezos wanted to build their second headquarters right here in New York. That move would have brought 25,000 jobs to her district, representing high-paying positions and exactly the kind of tech work New York is desperate to secure. He pulled up a set of statistics on the screen showing $27 billion in revenue for New York over the next decade, representing employment growth and opportunity. He pointed a dramatic finger right at her, stating she ran them out of town and attacked the tax incentives offered to bring Amazon there. He noted she actually claimed that money could have been spent on other things, shaking his head in a show of pure theatrical disbelief. He told Alexandria that is not how tax incentives function, explaining that this is basic entry-level economics. He clarified that they weren't handing Amazon a check, but were just promising to take a smaller cut of their money if they showed up and hired people. He turned back to the crowd with his voice getting louder, explaining that without Amazon, New York doesn't see a single dime of those taxes. You turned $27 billion over 10 years into a big fat zero. And the worst part is, you celebrated it as some kind of victory. The crowd was starting to lose their minds because Trump was completely in his element. He told her she has a degree in economics, but clearly doesn't understand the basics, failing to understand unemployment, tax breaks, or how a business operates. He leaned over his podium toward her and suggested that maybe she ought to stick to mixing drinks because economics clearly isn't her strong suit. The whole building erupted while AOC's face turned bright red and Sean Hannity looked like he was fighting back a smirk. She holds an economics degree, but managed to chase away 25,000 jobs. So comment, bartender, if you still remember that Amazon disaster. AOC tried to push back by retreating to her usual talking points, claiming this is the perfect example of the wealthy elite protecting a system built on exploitation. Trump cut her off with a delighted smirk, saying, if we are talking about the wealthy, we should talk specifically about her. He reached down and grabbed a folder, flipping it open with a flourish to say nothing. Screams champion of the working class like a pair of $580 designer shoes. He asked if she remembered the Met Gala in September of 2021, and a photo popped up on the screen showing AOC in a white gown with "Tax the Rich" emblazoned in red. She was posing on the carpet among stars and cameras, and Trump started reading from his notes like he was assessing a piece of real estate. The ticket price for the Met Gala was $35,000 for a single night, which is more than half of what the average American family earns in a year. He looked up at her and said she wore a dress that said, "Tax the Rich," while partying at an event filled with millionaires and billionaires. He asked if she really did not see the irony in that, and the audience was laughing so hard that people were literally in tears. Trump pulled out even more photos, telling everyone to take a look at her apartment building in the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C. It was a stunning building with every luxury amenity imaginable, and the rent is $1,700 a month, which is more than most Americans pay for their entire mortgage. Another picture flashed on the screen showing her Manolo Blahnik shoes worn to a photo op specifically about income inequality, with a price tag of $580. He set the photos down and addressed the audience, noting she pulls in $174,000 a year as a congresswoman. He played a clip of AOC in an interview claiming the congressional salary actually makes it hard to afford living in D.C., repeating it with total disbelief. The median household income in this country is $70,000, yet she makes more than double the average and complains it is not enough. He walked to the very edge of his podium, with his voice rising with every point he made about the ticket, the apartment, and the designer heels. He noted she drives a Tesla while she is busy attacking fossil fuels, then turned to face her directly to say she isn't a socialist, but a champagne socialist. He told her she is just a high-end liberal with a flashier brand, noting she is in the top 10% of American earners while pretending she is not. He shook his head at her, saying she lives in luxury while lecturing working-class folks about how they need to sacrifice more. He stated that at least he doesn't hide the fact that he is wealthy, as he actually enjoys being rich and is proud of the fortune he made. He pointed out that wearing Tax the Rich gowns to galas that cost more than what most Americans earn in a year isn't standing up for people, but is just being a hypocrite. The crowd jumped to their feet in a massive ovation, and AOC looked like she was ready to vanish into thin air. Sean Hannity finally tried to take back the reins and move the conversation toward actual policy, suggesting they talk about the Green New Deal. Trump cut in eagerly, whipping out what looked like a calculator to run the numbers that Alexandria clearly skipped when she was drafting her plan. He said she can't tell you where $93 trillion is coming from, but he can tell you it is going straight to nowhere. Trump gave the calculator a dramatic tap, noting the Green New Deal estimates show it would cost a staggering $93 trillion over a decade. He held up the calculator so everyone could see the figure, explaining that breaks down to $600,000 for every single household in America. He asked the crowd if they could afford an extra $600,000, And the crowd roared back, no. Trump added that he couldn't either, flashing a grin to remind them he is a billionaire. He put the calculator aside and pulled some documents up on the big screen to show the really funny part regarding the FAQ released by her team. They wiped it from the internet within hours because people started asking the very questions they had no answers for. The deleted FAQ flashed on the screen as Trump began reading it aloud in a theatrical voice, highlighting economic security for those unwilling to work. He asked if they literally wanted to cut checks for people who just didn't feel like showing up, and the crowd let out a chorus of boos. He read the goal for net zero over 10 years because they were not sure if they could totally eliminate farting cows. The room absolutely erupted with laughter, and Trump had to pause and wait for the noise to die down. He noted this was actually in their official document, and they were legitimately stressed out about cow farts. He kept reading about building enough high-speed rail so that flying on an airplane isn't even necessary anymore, asking how exactly she plans on getting to Hawaii. Even some of the AOC fans in the room couldn't help but laugh, as Trump finally set the paper down. He said he asked his experts how on earth we pay for $93 trillion, and every single economist told him, you simply cannot. It is literally impossible to fund, even if you taxed every billionaire at 100% and took every cent they have. Even if you took every single dollar from anyone making over 100 grand, you still wouldn't even be close. He turned his gaze directly toward AOC and asked seriously how she is paying for this, demanding she show the actual numbers. AOC began her response by citing the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but Trump cut her right off to demand specific numbers. She had no answer, and the silence in the room became incredibly awkward because an answer doesn't exist. Trump said his tone turned dead serious, accusing her of making the whole thing up and drafting a proposal that looks great in a tweet, but falls apart in the real world. You're looking to wipe out 10 million fossil fuel jobs, wreck whole industries, and blow $93 trillion we don't even have. He pulled up even more data, showing multiple independent economic studies say her Green New Deal would be a total catastrophe. Trump stepped out to the center of the stage and noted she keeps bringing up Nordic countries and Danish socialism. He asked if she knew the Prime Minister of Denmark explicitly told Bernie Sanders to stop calling them a socialist nation. They have free markets and corporate tax rates that are actually lower than ours, making them a capitalist country with strong social programs. He pointed a finger right at her, saying she doesn't even understand the very countries she is using as her examples. He delivered his final line with flawless timing, stating this isn't a policy, but a bedtime story. AOC was visibly shaken, but tried to pivot back to her comfort zone, claiming to be a Bronx native who truly understands the daily struggles of working-class families. Trump interjected by holding up his hand and telling her to stop because she is not from the Bronx. He produced official property records showing she was raised in Yorktown Heights in Westchester County, one of the wealthiest areas in the entire country. A map flashed on the screen with Yorktown Heights clearly visible, noting the median home value is $450,000. Trump turned his gaze toward the audience, explaining this is nothing like the gritty urban environment she pretends to represent. Images began to appear on the screen showing gorgeous houses, tree-lined streets, and spotless parks where people commute to Manhattan for six-figure salaries. Her father was a successful architect, and her mother worked in the real estate business, while she attended Boston University, where tuition costs $60,000 a year. He pivoted to face her directly, stating she markets herself as a girl from the streets who beat the odds, but in reality, she grew up in privilege. Trump stepped closer to her side of the stage acknowledging she spent a couple of years bartending after college. He said plenty of people work as bartenders, and it is just a job, but she acts like she was some oppressed worker struggling to survive. He gave a dismissive shake of his head, noting she had a degree from an elite expensive university and chose to work at a bar while figuring out her next move. He stated that is not a hardship, but just a typical post-grad job search, mentioning his own kids took on summer jobs. The contrast was obvious as Trump hammered it home that he actually grew up in Queens and worked construction. He pointed his finger directly at her, accusing her of fabricating a whole persona because the girl from the Bronx makes a good story. Trump's voice grew even louder as he told her she isn't authentic but is nothing more than a product. He said she doesn't represent the working people but is just using their struggle while living in luxury and attending expensive events. The crowd erupted in cheers as he stated he has never lied about who he is and is proud of the empire he built. His closing remark was absolutely cutting, stating at least he is honest about his identity and asking who she really is. Trump wasn't finished yet and turned to a different section of his files to talk about her grandmother in Puerto Rico. AOC's face turned pale because she knew exactly where he was heading with this topic. He said she used her own grandmother for political gain, then turned down help, which is heartless. He noted she posted all about her grandmother's damaged house after Hurricane Maria to attack him and score political points. He brought up her tweets on the big screen showing her posts about her grandmother's plight, and agreed that the hurricane was truly devastating. Trump took a brief pause, then his tone grew much more intense, asking if she knew what conservatives did when they heard about her grandmother. They started a fundraiser to help her out, raising over $100,000 of real money from real people. The specific number appeared on the screen showing $14,000 raised, and Trump asked if she knew what happened to that money. He stared directly at AOC and stated her office turned it down, refusing to let her own grandmother get that help just because it came from conservatives. The audience let out a gasp as the official statement from AOC's office appeared on the screen, declining the funds. You refused the money because accepting help from your opponents would destroy your narrative that conservatives don't care about people. Trump's voice was reaching a crescendo now, emphasizing that this is her own flesh and blood. He turned to address the audience, asking if her home ever actually got repaired, or if she ever received any help. He turned back to face AOC once more to say she didn't, and CNBC blared the headline that markets rallied on AOC humiliation. Investor confidence shot up as socialist policies were soundly rejected, and the conservative media machine went into full-blown overdrive. Fox News replayed the entire debate 3 separate times within the first 24 hours, and Hannity dedicated whole episodes to every point Trump drove home. Tucker Carlson ran a week-long series on the economic basics that Alexandria just doesn't grasp, while Laura Ingraham brought on experts to break down the disaster of the Green New Deal. The real story was that even the mainstream media couldn't look away, and the viewership numbers were just too massive to ignore. CNN was forced into non-stop coverage, with panels looking visibly pained, and MSNBC brought on economists who had to admit Trump was spot on about the price tag. The New York Times even ran a fact-check that backed up most of Trump's claims about her expensive lifestyle and lack of knowledge. The bartender economics meme blew up everywhere, and viral photos of AOC behind a bar edited with economics textbooks flooded the internet. Clips of her claiming unemployment is low because people have 2 jobs started playing on an endless loop. That Met Gala photo of her in the the rich dress became the ultimate symbol of progressive hypocrisy, showing up in every campaign ad. Suddenly, the decision to kill the Amazon deal looked completely vindicated, and business leaders in New York finally felt they could speak up. The New York Post screamed from the front page that AOC cost the city 25,000 jobs, and local politicians started openly calling out her lack of understanding. You could see the total collapse just by looking at her social media stats, as her Twitter mentions flipped to being 70% negative in just 48 hours. Her Instagram comments turned into a total battlefield because not even her most loyal followers could justify taxing the rich while she was hitting up expensive galas. The polls showed just how devastating the fallout really was, as her approval rating in her own district tanked from 52% to just 24%. Nationally, her support among Democrats plummeted, and among independent voters, she dropped to a staggering 11%. Within a week, a serious primary challenger emerged, a businesswoman with a real track record of building companies and creating jobs. Her launch video was packed with highlights from the debate stage stating Alexandria likes to talk about economics, but she is the one who understands it. In her first week of fundraising, she pulled in over $8 million, mostly from small donors who were done with the socialist pipe dream. Democratic leadership started making a public exit, and Nancy Pelosi gave a curt response saying, "Every member has to speak for themselves." Chuck Schumer played it safe by flat-out refusing to back AOC's specific stances, and moderate Democrats used the debate to tear into the Green New Deal. Without much fanfare, AOC was quietly stripped of her committee assignments, which everyone knew was a direct punishment. She had officially become political poison, and her ties to failed socialist plans meant she couldn't be trusted with policy decisions anymore. The squad's entire influence crumbled almost overnight, and Ilhan Omar and Rashid saw their own numbers dive just by being in AOC's orbit. Members of the Progressive Caucus started keeping their distance to save themselves, and democratic socialism basically became a national punchline. 3 weeks after the debate, The Atlantic dropped a brutal long-form piece titled "How Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez Lost the Economic Argument." It was written by a progressive economist who detailed every single mistake and every moment her lack of knowledge was laid bare. The article tore into her confusion over unemployment stats and her failure to explain how to pay for the Green New Deal. The final verdict was absolutely devastating, stating that her performance didn't just wreck her career, but set the entire movement back by a generation. Exactly 1 month after the debate, AOC called a press conference and read from her notes with a slight tremor in her voice. She announced she wouldn't be seeking re-election in 2026, claiming she decided to step away to find other ways to serve the community. The statement was carefully phrased to make it look voluntary, but everyone knew Trump had effectively ended her political career in just an hour and a half. The cultural impact reached far beyond the defeat of a single politician, as the debate between capitalism and socialism had been settled for good. Polling revealed that support for socialist policies among young people plummeted 22 points in a single month. Business schools across the country began adding the debate to their programs as a case study for multiple subjects. Harvard Business School developed a full case study on how social media fame meets economic scrutiny. At Stanford, the economics department used clips from the debate in their intro courses to focus on Trump's breakdown of why AOC's unemployment claims were impossible. 2 months after the debate, Trump held a massive rally in the South Bronx, the real Bronx and not the wealthy suburbs. Over 25,000 people showed up, packing every available inch of Crotona Park. The crowd was a diverse mix of working-class New Yorkers who had watched their supposed representative get exposed as a fraud on national television. NY1 interviewed attendees who were fed up with AOC's representation, with one resident noting she didn't know the first thing about the Bronx. When Trump finally took the stage, the The roar from the crowd was deafening as he stood there for nearly 2 minutes, just soaking in the energy. This was AOC's home turf, yet they were cheering for the billionaire capitalist who exposed her. Trump yelled into the microphone about the real Bronx, and the crowd went wild. He reminded them that Alexandria said she was from here, but she is actually from Yorktown Heights, which is very expensive, and not the Bronx. He let the crowd boo for a moment before reminding them of the debate where they went head-to-head on capitalism versus socialism. The crowd began chanting capitalism, and Trump smiled before raising his hands for silence. He told them that economics happened, math happened, and reality happened. He listed the straightforward questions he asked her regarding the $93 trillion bill and the Amazon decision. He asked how she justifies wearing a tax-the-rich dress to a $35,000 gala, noting she sat there in silence because there aren't any answers. He declared that socialism just doesn't work and never will, and when you hold it up to basic math, the whole thing falls apart. The audience was hooked, hanging on to every single syllable as he explained that socialism buckled under the sheer weight of its own absurdity. As for Alexandria, she is finished and stepping away for good at only 36 years old. When he brought up AOC's retirement, the room went wild with a standing ovation that lasted 7 full minutes. People were literally jumping for joy and hugging their neighbor as a massive chant filled the air. Trump said the best part was that it wasn't him who took her down, but economics and her own conflicting stories. He waved a hand toward the crowd and promised to keep standing up for capitalism and showing that socialism fails every time. The crowd let out a thunderous roar, waving their flags, because America is not a socialist nation. This isn't a place where former bartenders get to lecture billionaires on how the economy works. America is the land of opportunity, where anyone can build and succeed through hard work and free enterprise. That final line absolutely brought the house down, and that is not going to change, not today or ever. This was far more than just a simple debate, as it was a battle between experience and ideology, with reality winning so clearly that it shifted the entire political landscape. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez represented a movement that believed good vibes and social media fame could replace actual expertise. She stood for the notion that you can bash capitalism while reaping its rewards and living a life of luxury. Trump shattered that illusion in just 90 minutes without relying on cheap insults, but by using cold, hard facts and her own words against her. He proved that socialism cannot answer the most basic economic questions and does not have a way to pay for its promises. She turned out to be wrong about every single thing, thinking her carefully crafted story would protect her from anyone looking too closely at her actual plans.